Welcome back, freaks, to another episode of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks. I am one of your hosts, Jack Deth. Jared Hornbeck, and I am coming to you from Angel City. I'm coming to you guys from Brooklyn, New York, and from the present. Don't worry, I'm from the present. I am the Jared that you know from the present. I am not one of my ancestors. Sorry, I don't want to give too much away. Who is going to take this ride with me today?
Hi, it's Steve Guntley. How's it going? Well, welcome, everybody. This is the podcast that's all about long seconds, killer Santas, and tanning zombies. And that is to say, this is a podcast about full moon features. So each week, we're going to dig into the wild, low-budget universe of Charles Band's prodigious direct-to-video empire. And I think empire is the right word in this context, because today we're delving into kind of the precursor to the full moon universe, the thing that kind of gave Charles Band the runway to set up this whole wild little enterprise.
That's right, Band Bros. Ooh, we should copyright that, because we are Band Bros. Anyone who's listening to us, regardless of your sexual orientation or gender, are ostensibly a band bro.
Yeah,
we're talking about. You're a bro. We're talking about Trancers from 1984. And the fact that this is from 1984 is crazy because there are so many similarities to the Terminator in this. And these movies were released about 2 weeks apart.
Yeah.
So I think if you watch this movie, one of your instincts is to be like, well, this is a big old ripoff of the Terminator, and one other movie for sure, and another that I'm going to kind of shoehorn in there that I think I see some similarities between. But it's like, yeah, this thing must have seen Terminator, and someone must have... unless someone had a man on the inside. This just happened to be released less than a month in the UK, not in the US. It wasn't released in the US until May of 1985.
That's right.
And it takes place in 1985. Whereas Terminator was an 84 release that takes place partially, at least in 84.
Yeah, but I think it was just like parallel thinking, even knowing how quickly these movies are turned around in general. Like 2 weeks is a really tight spot, and Terminator was not a movie that was necessarily on everybody's radar. It was kind of a, like, holy shit, this movie's really good. Like, it's sort of a word of mouth hit. But it wasn't necessarily like, this is going to be the big movie of this year.
You mean to tell me that the new movie from the director of Piranha 2, The Spawning, was not the talk of the town in 1984?
From the special effects artists of Battle Beyond the Stars? What? Amazing.
I was reading in, I guess just on Wikipedia, that James Cameron was actually a fan of the movie Trancers.
He is, yeah.
Which is not surprising, and Quentin Tarantino, also a fan of Trancers.
Neil Gaiman, lots of cool people.
Me and presumably you, fans of Trancers also, which we'll get.
This was my first time seeing this movie. When I watched it this weekend, I had a blast. I watched it with my girlfriend, and we both had a really great time. This is such a swift movie. It's a 74-minute long movie, so it's not really bloated in any way. It's pretty lean and pretty tight, and it's funny and it's exciting and it's pretty creative, and it's got a lot going for it. I think Trancers is a really great time.
And this was your first time seeing this, so you didn't really have much of a history with Trancers as a movie or a property before sort of coming into this undertaking?
No, truthfully, I didn't really know much about this series at all. Like most of the movies we're going to be talking about, I do remember seeing the VHS box art on the shelf, but this one didn't necessarily grab me, because if the box, as I recall, was just Tim Thomerson wearing a helmet, which he doesn't really wear. I guess he kind of wears that scuba helmet in the beginning, but that's not really his look in this movie at any point. And it made it look like a much more generic, sci-fi action movie than it wound up being.
Oh, there's a reason it looks the way it does on the cover art, is because it's hoping somebody is going to misread it and say, oh, Trancers.
Oh, yeah.
This is that movie I've heard about with those guys that are inside the video game, right?
Yeah, one of those Trons I've heard so much about. Yeah.
Exactly. That's really what I think they're going for in this cover. Similarly to you, Steve. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to ask you, what your history was with it.
Yeah, so similarly to you, this is not one that I really knew too much about. I had heard the name thrown around a little bit, sort of in the realm of cheapy knockoff sci-fi movies, and I don't think it ever really jumped out to me, because if you really give me the chance, most of the time I will gravitate towards a horror movie before I will gravitate towards a sci-fi movie. Not that I have anything against sci-fi, and I love Alien and Aliens, and 2001 is one of my favorite movies of all time. And I do enjoy a sci-fi movie, especially when they have some horror elements in it, like the first Alien.
Yeah.
But this one, I feel like it only by reputation of it being this kind of like cheap knockoff, sort of very riffable midnight movie type thing, it never really jumped out at me as one to see. And then even once I started to learn a little bit more about Full Moon as a company and Charles Band, or an Empire, I should say, as a company, and Charles Band as a person, I was kind of like, oh, okay. And then I knew Tim Thomerson as Doll Man before I knew him as Jack Deth. And then I was like, okay. And I have a big background since then in film noir and in some of the things that this movie apes. And so watching it now, I was like, man, this is one, had I seen it, I saw it for the first time a few years ago, and this was watching it this time. I watched it for both my second and third watching, I think, for this episode. And I think my thought process was just like, had I seen this 15, 20 years ago, I really probably would have dug it. I'm glad I got to see it now. It certainly outlives its reputation, because I think there's some pretty cool stuff that it does. And for anybody who... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, and I thought it was a good one to bring up fairly early in the run of our show, because this is one of kind of the signature movies of the Empire Pictures era, and it's pretty important, like carrying over. It's one of the few that carried over from Empire into Full Moon, so it's kind of a good transition point for us to talk about. And it's also the movie that Charles Band is most proud of, according to his autobiography. This is the one that he really considers his baby, and I think with good reason. I think there's good reason for him to be proud of this movie. I wanted to dig in a little bit into the history of Empire, just so we have a little bit of context to kind of root where this movie came out of. So, like, one important thing to note about Charles Band is that he was always an early adapter of home video. So in the 70s, he struck up this friendship with Roddy McDowall, the actor from Planet of the Apes. And Roddy McDowall's kind of big hobby was getting old film reels and then converting them for home viewing. He was kind of one of the guys who was at the forefront of that. And it was sort of like a black market operation back then. Like, you weren't really supposed to be dubbing these movies for your own personal viewing. But because of Roddy McDowall, a lot of movies were saved from just like vanishing completely. Like, he got these movies and like converted them into home video formats, and that's why so many movies still exist today. And Charles Band got in on this too, and the two of them would like swap movies and things like that and kind of share leads and things. And so Charles Band actually opened one of the very first video stores in America. There was two different video stores that were in LA, and he was like right there at the forefront. The problem is, it was 1982. VCRs were not really a household fixture just yet, and a lot of people would come in, rent a movie, and have no idea what to do with it. Like, what, do I put this on top of my TV? And nothing worked. That was a great story he shared in his autobiography. A lady saying, I put this tape on top of my TV and nothing happened. Makes me think of that episode of House with the lady like spraying the asthma inhaler on her neck. It's kind of that. But yeah, so those stores didn't really work out, but it does show that he was kind of on the forefront, and within like 5 years of that store shutting down, Blockbuster would become this hugely dominant thing, and the home video market would just really explode. So previously in the 70s, Band had a company just called Charles Band Pictures, but he was not really happy with the way that his movies were being distributed by the big studios. So he founded Empire International Pictures around 1983 when he was trying to hawk a sequel to Parasite, his Demi Moore movie. And that never really happened, but he did strike up a very valuable partnership with Vestron Video. And that was going to ensure that Full Moon features would get a prominent play. You're wearing the shirt, of course.
I have to say, I'm wearing a Vestron Video t-shirt right now. This is not an accident. I chose this because we were doing an Empire movie.
Yes.
And I also have a shirt of Media Home Entertainment, which is what inevitably Meta Home Entertainment became. I think when it changed hands, it went from Meta to Media. I believe that's how that went down.
Yeah.
And so that's the one of the video stores that you're referring to. So as listeners, hopefully you'll become accustomed. I hope, to the fact that I come prepared.
Oh yeah. No, and you have a seemingly inexhaustible number of T-shirts that you have for every occasion. I'm very impressed.
Oh my God! Do not remind my wife of that, because she just looks at my drawer and sees that it just keeps expanding and expanding. And I try to go through and take some out and like, all right, I don't wear this one much. I'll put this in the donation pile. We try to kind of cycle through, but then it's sort of common knowledge that if I get rid of like 5 shirts for donation, within the next couple of weeks, 5 more are going to take its place. It's really regenerative and kind of sad, but kind of awesome at the same time.
There are worse vices to have. For sure. So yeah, now with this new partnership with Vestron, that's ensuring basically that once the home video market starts to take off, that Empire films are going to get pretty good shelf placement at your Blockbuster, your Hollywood Videos, things like this. And it only took a couple of years for the home video market to really kind of pop off. And so Empire was kind of at the forefront of this, and they made a killing. Like, these movies would come out in theaters, because they needed the obligatory theatrical release at this time, but none of them were really hitting. I think Ghoulies was the only one that was kind of an actual successful box office movie.
Well, you know what they say, they'll get you in the end.
They will get you in the end. They'll swim right up that toilet and bite you around the butt. I'm excited to dig into that movie eventually. So with all this new success, Charles Band was actually able to purchase a movie studio. He bought Dino De Laurentiis' old movie studio in Rome. Now, if you don't know that name, De Laurentiis was responsible for a lot of like the big biblical epics and like the Hercules movies and things like that were big crossover Italian hits back in the 60s. And he had the largest movie studio in the world, but it had fallen almost completely into disrepair. So he was able to kind of come in, tidy the place up, and use it to make all of his new movies. He was also able to buy an Italian castle, which we will get into on certain Castle Freak related episodes in the future, because that's a great story. But yeah,
we were a little worried that if we titled the podcast simply Castle Freaks, that some of you would think maybe we were just going to do an in-depth exploration of Charles Band's singular castle or multiple castles. I know he had a lot of property in Romania, or I guess it was just a film studio in Romania.
Yeah.
But or just castle enthusiasts in general, which we might be, but that's not really why we're here.
We'll talk about the films of Nick Castle, so The Boy Who Could Fly.
The Shape.
The Shape, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but so Empire Films kind of fell apart by 1988. Now, I'm going to say this non-judgmentally about Charles Band, because I'm largely in the same boat, but I don't think he's particularly wise with his money all the time. He bought a castle and a movie studio, and he talks in his book about how he owned 30 properties in L.A. and had to keep selling them off, and then he bought Houdini's mansion and had to sell that off. Like, I think he makes a lot of like impulsive and passion-driven purchases that might make him a little more financially vulnerable. Unfortunately, it looks like in this case, an old family friend kind of took advantage of him when he declared bankruptcy and kind of bought the studio out from under him. But Charles Band is not one to be down for very long, and within a year of Empire folding, he'd founded Full Moon, struck up this partnership with Paramount, and the rest is history. But when he had to sell off most of Empire's assets, he sold pretty much all of these to MGM, which is why like Reanimator and Troll and movies like that will all be found on MGM labels. However, the one movie he held on to, the one movie he retained the rights for, was Trancers, because he really felt like that had franchise potential, and it, like I said, it was a movie he was most proud of. Which leads us to Trancers. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some of the key players as they come up, because the cool thing about both Empire and Full Moon is that they're pretty. It's kind of a family atmosphere, and they use a lot of the same people over and over and over. They all keep coming back to work on things, and we're going to be meeting a lot of them in this movie for the first time. So, of course, we start with Charles Band. We've talked about him. He's actually directing this one. This is the first directorial effort of his that we're going to be talking about. It's written by Danny Bilson and Paul DeMeo. Now, these guys are interesting. This is their first screenplay. It would lead to these two having a pretty wild career. They would write The Rocketeer for Disney, which is a very early childhood favorite of mine that I still love. They were consulting producers on The Sims, the video game The Sims. They worked on that. And then they wrote the script to Spike Lee's Da 5 Bloods, which like got Oscar buzz, incidentally. And also Danny Bilson, incidentally, is the father of Rachel Bilson from The OC. So beautiful, successful actress. So, hey, good for him. And the associate producer here is Debbie Dion, who is the second Mrs. Charles Band, apparently a very cool person. The editor is a guy named Ted Nicolau, who would be one of Band's longest and most trusted collaborators. He's going to direct more than a dozen Full Moon features, including the entire Subspecies series, which we will be getting to pretty soon.
Yeah, we will be getting there, man.
And then Mac Ahlberg, a Swedish cinematographer who worked on a bunch of these movies. Unfortunately, he died in 2012, but he's going to be the cinematographer for a bunch of Full Moon features, all the way up to Evil Bong, which we will talk about next week. And then finally, we have Tim Thomerson, who was one of a favorite of Charles Band, and he would collaborate with him on several projects, most notably in the Trancers sequels and in the aforementioned Doll Man, which I'm very excited to get to. I've never seen that one. He's a former stand-up comedian turned character actor. If you haven't seen these, maybe you saw him playing the dad in Near Dark.
Yep.
Yeah, which I mostly remember because his character's name in that is Loy, and I just remember that's the craziest first name for somebody to have.
I like to think that James Cameron said to Catherine Bigelow, you know, I'm going to back you a little bit making this Near Dark movie, but you got to have the guy from Trancers in it. It was just a non-negotiable. He said, I love Trancers so much, you got to get Tim Thomerson in that vampire movie.
Absolutely.
And speaking of Tim Thomerson, and I also like to think, like, we've got all these people who are trusted collaborators and people who worked with Charles Band all through his early years, through Empire, through Full Moon. I think from this point on, just for prosperity, we should call them band buddies.
Yeah. Okay. So we're the band bros, and they're the band.
We're
buddies.
the band bros. They're the band buddies.
They're the band of buddies.
Band of buddies, exactly. Speaking of Tim Thomerson, so this is not something I'm going to do particularly often, but we do want to give a little background about what happens in the movie itself before we start to break it down individual scenes.
Yeah.
And I'm not really a fan of reading from Wikipedia or out loud on mic or just from a Google search about a property, but I will say that the one from Googling Trancers as a movie is really succinct. It just says a trooper, Tim Thomerson, leaves 2247 Angel City for 1985 Los Angeles to stop a zombie mystic, Michael Stefani, out to change history. And that is exactly what this thing is.
Yeah.
And what I love is sometimes when you Google search a movie, there's the why to watch comes up, and there's these little blurbs or critiques of it. And this one just has a four-word, I should say, phrase as a description of this movie: fiery, absurd, and extreme. And
yeah,
I would say,
I'll counter on the extreme, because this is, correct me if I'm wrong, this might be one of the only PG-13 movies we're going to be talking about. Like, so this movie is not particularly gory or like full of nudity or any of the outrageous stuff that we come to associate with the brand going forward. So this is kind of the closest we have to like a mainstream crossover sort of popcorn movie.
Sure, and this must also be an early PG-13, because if we're talking, this is a November 1994 initial, although maybe it wasn't rated in the United States until May of 85, but I mean,
that's
we know
sometimes the case, yeah.
Yeah, June or July, whenever it was in 84, when they adopted that PG-13 rating, this is still pretty early in that. But yeah, I mean, this movie starts with one of my favorite things ever, which is just like a hugely like broad-shouldered trench coat wearing detective getting out of a car in front of a diner that somehow looks both 100 years in the future and 80 years in the past.
Definitely. It's very Blade Runner-y. Like, it's definitely going for like discount Blade Runner in a really fun way. Like, I kept thinking of all the futuristic designs in this movie, and I don't know if you're a Mr. Show fan, but there's a sketch on the old Mr. Show where like there's a fake movie imagining a future where streakers control the universe, you know, and it looked like they were pulling a lot of the design elements for that skit like straight from this movie. I would not be surprised if that's the case.
Yeah, everything's kind of saturated in blues and neons, and it's got some pretty heavy-handed noir voiceover coming right in and getting you up to date. And I sort of like how I will say this, and you know what, we covered Blade Runner on another podcast where we talked about the pros and cons of that movie, and Tim Thomerson's voiceover better than Harrison Ford's voiceover. Sorry, have to say it on mic.
I can imagine that Tim Thomerson didn't have a gun pointed to his head, forcing him to read it. Yeah, so he was probably digging into it a little bit more. Yeah, I mean, I just love, like, the future stuff, like, is kind of all front-loaded in this movie, but, like, I think it's so cheesy and so good. Like, I love this kind of 80s convention of just taking all the cars and making them more angular. So it's like they look like they were pulled straight out of Star Fox, but like that's just how you signify that they are like futuristic now.
Well, movies did that a lot with other things. Like, I mean, just look at Tim Thomerson's like shoulder pads in his jacket. Like, they're more angular.
Yeah.
He's sort of, you know, they wanted to design him so that he would look like sort of like a Tex Avery wolf.
Right.
Like he's got like a suit, like he's got the suit on like that, and they've got the big sort of like 1940s square suit pants, you know, going on too. And I just really love everything about this opening. And you go in and you get a little bit of exposition about how he's sent there to find a Trancer because they got sort of an alert saying that there was a Trancer suspect nearby. He puts the bracelet on, it reads negative, and then it turns out it's the unassuming old woman behind the diner counter who's actually the Trancer.
Good twist. We should say a Trancer is basically just a zombie. Like, because that's not made super clear, but like the villain of this movie is a guy named Whistler, who just has the ability to turn. It's specifically weak-minded people can turn to zombies. Like, if you're smart and savvy, then you're okay. So like, there's a little bit of a I don't know, kind of a nasty take to that. It's not just like anybody's vulnerable. It's just the dumb people.
Just the squids.
Yeah, the squids, yeah. And wet hairs for squids, as we all know. Yeah, but so this movie's got a really clever approach to time travel, which we would kind of see this later on, but like this might be the first time we've seen like this kind of method used. The character, so he needs to go back in time to chase down Whistler, who is the villain who killed his wife, and our character Jack Deth, by the way. His name's Jack, Deth. Deth.
And Jack Deth is told that Whistler is still alive by Babe Ruth from The Sandlot.
That's
Art
right.
LaFleur.
Yeah. Art LaFleur, the bulldoggiest looking character actor. I always love seeing him pop up. But yeah, so he needs to go back in time to stop Whistler. And the way you go back in time isn't like Terminator style where you like go back. It's like a one-way trip and you go back. You basically take a drug that lets you inhabit the body of an ancestor. So you need to go way down the line to find somebody that, like, you know, has some of your DNA. It's kind of like Assassin's Creed almost. Like, that's sort of the concept behind Assassin's Creed. And so he luckily has an ancestor in 1985 that looks exactly like him and has the same, like, physical build. And so we don't need to have another actor doing this. But I always thought that's kind of a clever premise, you know, like the ability that he's still technically in the year 2247. His consciousness has just come back.
Yeah, that's a super cool detail. And it works for a lot of things. It sort of answers questions you might have about, like, you know, the Back to the Future sort of time travel. Like, what happens if you run into yourself? Like, this would sort of prevent that from happening because your consciousness would take over. Not you personally, but it would be like an ancestor of yours. And it could also be played for laughs when his boss comes back as his only ancestor of the time, like a young, whiny little stinker of a girl, which is
in PJs. Like, he never gets her out of PJs. Like, so it's always funny to have like a tough talking little girl come over and pull the whole police chief routine. But when he goes back to the past, that's when we get to meet one of the, like, not often do we get, like, people who really cross over and become, like, big household name actors. But I think this is a case of, like, a very early performance from a future household name. This is Helen Hunt, a 21-year-old Helen Hunt stars in this movie. Of course, she would go on to star in Mad About You and then be in Twister, and then she won Best Actress for As Good as It Gets. Like, so a legitimate Oscar winner or future Oscar winner in this movie, and she's really good.
You can tell she has like star power, star
She
quality
does.
here. I think from the first second she's on screen, like you can tell she just transcends. You can't take your eyes off of her in the scenes that she's in. Like you could just tell that she has something. So like this must
She
have been
has
a
a
big
lot of
yeah.
intelligence as an actress. Like she's not a squid. You can tell immediately not a squid, despite her hair being dry.
Yeah, she made that one mistake. She decided to, in order to tease your hair and get a blue streak in it like that, I think it has to be dry. But she just has such charisma, and I love her attitude towards this. Like she's not hamming it up, but she's winking. I think even though she's a young actress and she recognizes she's in a B movie, she recognizes she's going to have some fun. She's a little winky, naughty towards the camera in some ways, but she's just like, she's having a blast, and she plays well, I think, off of Tim Thomerson. And you mentioned her
Yeah.
age, 20 to 21-year-old Helen Hunt, I think is interesting because the Hap Ashley, I believe is the name of the baseball player.
Yeah.
Or something along those lines, who they're trying to go back based on the baseball card. And she looks at the card and says, like, the 63 Angels, I wasn't born then,
Right.
is interesting because I think let's be generous and say she was born in 64. We're looking at a 20-year-old character with Tim Thomerson here, which could get a little weird, although the age difference is not quite what you would expect because
This blew my mind. Yeah.
He
like 36 here, 37.
I think probably 37 at the time when they really are starting
Younger than
principal
either of
photography.
us.
Yes, and he looks, and no offense to Tim Thomerson, I mean, he's got a great rugged character actor face.
Oh, yeah.
But I feel like he looks like he could play our fathers in a movie.
I would have guessed, like, looking at it, I would have guessed like late 40s, because I'm like, I knew Tim Thomerson is still alive. I'm like, wow, he must be quite old. And I'm like, not really. He's in his 70s now, like, but he's 37 here, and he looks like he's at least in his late 40s. Like, it's
Yeah.
just weird how the way people have aged has changed dramatically. Like, maybe it's just because we're not smoking and drinking quite as much, but yeah.
This is probably true. And I remember in Doll Man, which is 7 years later, thinking that Tim Thomerson was mid 50s probably in that movie. And realistically, he was only about 44 or so making the movie. And I'm like, that's a lot younger than I thought by looking at him. But
he's really great in this movie too. And I think, the two of them just have great chemistry together, and it makes the scenes a lot of fun. Like, you're not really thinking about the age difference too much. Like, they do specify that, like, the character that he has, or the ancestor he has jumped into, is kind of like a sleazy, like, womanizer type. And that's how he hooked up with Helen Hunt, but now he's like, readopting and chasing down Whistler, who has taken the form of a police detective. And so he's also got like this kind of submission. Like, there are these elders in the future who all have ancestors, and Whistler's trying to take them down. So like, obviously if he kills their ancestors, then they won't exist, so he's got to try and protect some of these, and that's where we get Hap Ashby, who is the baseball player, is now down on his luck and living like a bum on the streets. But really, he only comes into effect in like the last 10 minutes of the movie. He becomes like a character, but not until the very, very end.
which we can probably call like the third act. Yeah. Since this movie is 76 minutes long.
Yeah, it's so short, but like, yeah. And so we get a lot of like fun scenes where they're looking for trancers. We get a guy working at a tanning salon who obviously works at a tanning salon, so he must be a dum-dum, and he turns into a trancer. There's a Santa Claus that turns into a trancer, and this also needs to be specified. This is a Christmas movie. 100%. This is one of those classic LA Christmas movies where everybody's in shorts and tank tops. But
that was one of my favorite things about, I don't think I paid close attention to it the first time through, but then watching it this time being like, oh yeah, like this is an LA Christmas movie. And it's like the Christmas element of it comes early also. And so it's like, I was not thinking like that at all, and I'm like, you know what, like this is gonna go in the rotation now. Like this has enough Helen Hunt in her little Santa's elf costume, and a killer Santa Trancer. I mean, all these
There's
things
a
are
punk rock band playing a dirty version of Jingle Bells later in the movie. Yeah.
Also, for what it's worth, this movie released 2 days before Silent Night, Deadly Night.
Oh, okay. All right. No, so the better holiday horror option. I mean, this one's only kind of barely a horror, but it's got those elements of it. But yeah, I mean, so that's really kind of what we're dealing. I think we've kind of covered most of the fine points of the plot. Like one of the big things is when they find the baseball player towards the end, and he's instrumental in helping them survive. But then we get one of the more clever like sci-fi elements of this movie is a watch that slows down time. Like they call it a long second. So like 1 second for you feels like 10 seconds, but it still feels like 1 second to everybody else. Basically, and this just means like they use a slow-mo filter on everything while he runs around like Speedy Gonzalez and gets things done. But he's only got like the 10 seconds.
Right. And so I'm going to just kind of highlight, I have 2 things about that. One, I love that detail. I think it's so fun. I love that and what I also love about it is that they sort of, and this is for budgetary reasons, but also expository reasons, he can only use it once until he gets sort of refilled again. So I love that it's like he has to choose when he's going to use this long second, once early in the film and then later on at the end. And I love the fact that they shot everything in slow-mo. So really what we're seeing is one a 100 second. Yeah. Because and so you see him in slow-mo. I mean, I know it would have been way too tricky to do it where everything else, he's moving at normal speed and everything else is slowed down, and it would sort of ruin the effect of that time is standing still. So they play with it, but it is pretty funny because it's like this, you get these 10 seconds for 1 second. And I think the scene of him getting Helen Hunt to the car is about 4.5 minutes.
Oh yeah. It's so long. Like it doesn't line up at all, but it's still like a clever effect. And it does require him to go back into the future. And I like that they do that. I like that they remind us that he can just kind of be yoinked out and brought back to the future at any time. And he gets a refill on the time watch from the mom from Family Matters. So
excuse me, sir, not the mom. We're talking about Aunt Rachel.
Oh, excuse me.
One of my strangest childhood crushes, Thelma Hopkins.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what it was, but I was like 10 years old watching Family Matters, and I was like, I don't know, I'm kind of into Aunt Rachel. I don't know why.
Hey.
But I like seeing her pop up and stuff, and yeah, she's in that fun little... What I like about this movie is like you can see where every cent of this movie went. Yes. Like you can see how this budget is spent. I mean, this is a $400,000 budget movie, which in 1984 was still a small budget.
Still
like
pretty modest, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, now, given the way we shoot movies, you can really make something pretty incredible for $400,000. Yeah. But at the time, it was sort of like, if I always use Halloween as the sort of barometer for that. Like that was a $330,000 budget movie, shot, on film, shot over 21 days, super low budget, and you can really see, with the exception of like however whatever the rate was for Donald Pleasance, where that money went. And I feel the same way about Trancers, because by 1984, the majority of movies were at budgets over $1 million, $2, $3, $4 million, and so this is still getting it done on the cheap. And I just like that there's just enough detail in these sets. There's a really cool, and I've professed on other podcasts my love for matte paintings.
Yeah,
and there's a couple of really good ones here. The Los Angeles ruins underwater matte painting I really like.
It's pretty fun. It's clearly just like drawn onto the film. Like it's so good though.
Yeah, like that kind of stuff. I think I can just appreciate that the mentality behind a film like this is, we've got a cool concept. We're going to bang this script out. We're going to get, some people who we know will work with us and relationships we've made along the way. We're going to give these people jobs and work to do, and we're going to get this thing done, and we're going to do it for this amount of money, and we're going to do it fast, and we're going to do it cheap. And there's just not like a wasted frame or a bloated moment, and there's nowhere where you go, okay, so this is a $400,000 movie, like why does that thing look like it's cardboard? it's sort of like you can see where the attention to detail is put in, and I appreciate that about a little movie like this. This movie is plucky. It's got
Yeah.
character and it's interesting, and I just think it just kind of goes to show you that if you have a cool concept, you can make something that while still flawed in a number of ways as it pertains to production, performance, whatever, is still effective. And it reminds me of, I mean, I'm going to assume, Steve, that you at some point in your life are a pretty big Mystery Science Theater 3000 fan.
I mean, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a movie, there's two movies that they watch in Mystery Science Theater. One of them is called Soul Taker, and the other one is called, shit, you can edit that. I just lost the name of it.
I think they did a Dr. Mordred one.
Sorry. One of them is called Soul Taker, and the other one is called Time Chasers. And the thing I like about those movies is kind of the same thing. It's like they're low budget, so yeah, you could riff them, you could poke fun at the acting, the performances, or sort of cheapness in the sets and design and details or whatever. But they just have heart, and they know what story they're telling, and they have a solid concept and someone who was like, I'm gonna get this movie made and make it happen, and they tell a decent little story. And that's how I feel about Trancers. Like, I feel like it's just a fun concept. I think they added some interesting details. Love the long second, love the ancestor aspect of it. So they took something that was sort of cliche and wrote and jazzed it up a little bit and did what they did with their budget and put it all out there on the screen and made for a pretty effective little movie.
Absolutely. I'm excited to dig into the rest of this series. Like, one thing to note is that there is kind of like a little interrogative sequel, like a short film sequel. Charles Band was putting together a little anthology film called Pulse Pounders, and it had a short film sequel to his movie The Dungeon Master, a short film sequel to this, and then an original adaptation of an H.P. Lovecraft story. All of these went missing for like 20 years or something like that until they were found and restored and re-released in 2013. So there is now like 6.5 Trancers movies that you can find. And I think Tim Thomerson is in all except the sixth one, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Helen Hunt comes back all the way up to 3. Like, which is cool because Mad About You was on the air by the time that Trancers 3 was in production. Like, she was already kind of a big deal, but she agreed to come back because she apparently had a really great time working on these movies. Like, Charles Band has nothing but raves about her and her performances and just her as a person. So I think it's cool that like she absolutely did not need to do Trancers 3 at that point in her career, but she came back. I think that's cool.
Yeah, I think that speaks to the attitude of Full Moon comparatively to some other companies. I think Full Moon this is Empire, but Full Moon and Empire are sort of the same thing. We were saying before, we were describing this movie in the beginning, and I was thinking of how this movie is sort of a perfect center of a Venn diagram of what our mission statement in this show is. Yeah. It's like, this is a Charles Band directed movie that's somehow like an Empire movie, but the franchise goes into Full Moon, and so it's right smack dab in the middle. But I think, be it Empire, be it Full Moon, be it just Charles Band company, I think it speaks to, and we may have even mentioned this on Mike talking in our first episode about Puppet Master, that there's a difference when you're watching the product of Empire and Full Moon comparatively to Trauma or Asylum and things like that. And what I like about Trancers is when I watch Trancers, I never get the sense of like somebody is trying to make money per se off of ripping off popular properties, although that's definitely part of it. Like, I'm sure Blade Runner was a huge influence. I even want to throw out, and it's probably only tangentially influential because it only came out a few months earlier, but The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension.
Sure, yeah,
I kind of feel like I get some vibes from that in here too. And so they're wearing their influences on their sleeve, and Terminator was released concurrently with this. But I just feel like there is a really sincere effort here to tell a good story and make a good movie within the limitations of the budget. And I feel like as we watch more Empire and Full Moon movies, and maybe even some of the earlier ones like your Tourist Trap and last Foxtrot in Burbank, we gonna get our hands on that one? I don't know if anyone can get their hands on that one.
Charles Band, by his own admission, says that we should not watch that one. So we'll see.
Yeah, I just feel that a lot of what I'm noticing as I'm reaching out in the Full Moon oeuvre and Charles Band universe, that I'm noticing there are these sincere attempts to just sort of find a genre, work within that genre, make a compelling movie using the things that you have. And as we get deeper into Charles Band's filmography, we're going to start to see how he uses his castle, how he uses the Romanian location for shoots for other movies. And I just love the fact that I don't watch this and think, here is somebody trying to simply cash in, or, you know, make something that's going to confuse someone into picking up this VHS box off the shelf,
right?
Or just make a purposely bad movie. Because I feel like everyone here was working towards let's plug this, let's plug it out, let's get this thing out there, and they did it. And I think there's a nice sincerity and lack of pretension in this movie. Absolutely. That I just really appreciate.
Yeah, it's going off the Roger Corman model, and I think we brought it up in the last episode, but it's worth repeating. Like, Band's philosophy towards exploitation films isn't that people are being exploited. You hear that term and you think, oh, it's because women are always naked or people are always getting mutilated. It's not about exploiting a people. It's about exploiting a moment or an opportunity or a zeitgeist. You know, it's about finding what's in the air and making a quick turnaround version of that to sort of get in on that excitement while it's still hot. You know, we'll talk eventually about very recent projects he did, like the Corona Zombies, which is a movie he made about the pandemic the month the pandemic first happened. You know, like, he's able to turn these things around really, really quickly. I think that's like a pure exploitation movie. That's kind of the idea of what you're talking about.
I think it was like May of 2020 or something. They wrapped shooting on Corona Zombies.
Something crazy like that. Yeah. And he did it by, you know, we'll talk about that one, but he did it basically by doing like a What's Up Doc kind of What's New Pussycat kind of approach, where it's like an old movie that he redubbed into being this new movie. You know, a fun concept. But yeah, no, I'm with you. I think there is a lot of love for what they're doing, like kind of going throughout this whole enterprise, and I'm excited to continue digging in deeper. We're going to be, next week, we're going to be jumping way ahead, because I think there's another important phase of the Full Moon story that we need to talk about, and that's kind of the latter day phase. And this is the one I think I've been dreading a little bit. Maybe I'm getting too far ahead of myself, but we're going to be talking about the movie Evil Bong next week. So that's a movie that came out in 2006, and this is where I'm curious. I'm going to try and go in without like any super judgments, but I will admit that the Evil Bong and like the Ginger Dead Man movies are the ones that I'm struggling to get a little excited about.
Well, I think the reason for that, Steve, is that I think our relationship with your Ginger's Dead Man and your Bong's Evil are that we did not have the experience of seeing the VHS cover art for these things.
That's
the
fair.
The only sort of connection to this that I have is seeing the cover art in streaming service scrolling. And let me tell you, I'm not a fan of the artwork of these things. And they are not enticing at all to me scrolling past them. And I think that's the big disconnect, is that I only know Ginger Dead Man or Evil Bong from these covers, and I have never wanted to even open one out of morbid curiosity. And yet here we are. But I will say, Trancers, the other cool thing about Trancers as a property going into it is that this was a really fun movie, and I had seen it one time before, and I didn't remember it front to back. It definitely helped to watch it again, and I ended up watching it twice, because watching it twice is like watching 2 episodes of a television show on Netflix. It's like it takes no time to breeze.
It's so short
to breeze through this thing a couple times. But what I really am excited about is that I know nothing about the sequels or the rest of the franchise. I mean, when I say know nothing, I know what I read in It Came from the Video Aisle, and I know what I read in Confessions of a Puppet Master, and I know what I've subsequently read in Wikipedia and articles about Trancers as a property, but I have no relationship with any of the sequels, so I couldn't tell you off the top of my head if there's one. Like Puppet Master and some of the other franchises in Full Moon and Empire, I'm a little bit more familiar with some of the subsequent sequels. This is one, I knew this first movie, but like any of these remaining movies, I have zero knowledge of them. So going in,
I don't know them by like reputation or anything. Like I have no idea what to expect. So I am excited to dig more into those, and I'm hoping to be pleasantly surprised by Evil Bong. You know what? I'm going to go in with an open mind and, smoke some doobage and see if that enhances the experience. Why not?
It certainly can't make it worse, is how I'm going to go into it. But thanks again.
So, thank you again. We will see you all next week for an episode on Evil Bong. All right. Trance out. I don't know. That means nothing.
Stay gold, band bros. Oh, damn it. Band of Buddies. Wrong one.
Damn it.